Welcome to Activate Your Life. I am your host, Erin Esser, and I believe that life isn't a battleground. It's a playground of possibility where self-sabotage is transmuted into self-mastery. On this show, I share tools such as human design, astrology, inner child, and shadow work that help you disrupt your unconscious programming so that you can begin to experience the life that you desire. Don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe button to receive valuable information each week that will change your life. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the show. Welcome to the Activate Your Life show. Today, I'm very excited to have Christa Bevan with me. Krista is a dynamic self-care coach for radical mothers. She supports, empowers, and inspires mamas who are doing the work of offering themselves and their kids a better life with neuroscience-backed tools and heart-centered intuitive practices. Her mission really is to empower other radical mothers to break cycles of generational trauma using the power of nervous system literacy and dynamic self-care. Krista is a certified TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises provider and yoga instructor, as well as a mama herself. Her coaching practice helps to empower other mothers on a journey of healing trauma and doing deeply transformational personal development work. She is an educator, she's an inspirer, and she is a thought leader out there pushing other moms to that are ready for radical change in their lives with methods that deliver radical results, it sounds like. So welcome, Krista, to the show. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thanks, Erin. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So, one of the things that really got me with you, and I'm going to say this quote again to you, but when mothers heal, the world heals. And when I read your stuff that just grabbed me. And, as a mom myself of 3 and doing my own work over the years, like that just really hits home for me. And so I would love to maybe have you share your story. I know you had mentioned too that out of necessity, this is why you're here. So would you mind sharing your story of what got you to this point right now where you're helping mothers become radical mothers? And what does that even mean too?
Sure. So let's just start off with what radical mothers mean, because I think that's the best place to dive in, right? So
Sure.
I define radical mothers as those women who are poised, standing in their power, ready to disrupt cycles of generational trauma. And they know deep down in their bones that if they want to do that work and give their kids a better life, that they actually ultimately have to start off by giving themselves a better life first. And that's sort of where that line, when mothers heal, the world heals, comes from, because in the modern mothering paradigm that we all live under still, there's this notion that a good mom is a good martyr and that she has to give and give and give. And we all know that doesn't actually work.
Right.
And even those moms that seem to be doing that and seem to have all of their stuff together, under the surface really don't. And so the reality is that when we can start to make space for ourselves and do our own healing work, it really does heal the world, because it changes us, it changes our children, it changes how we show up in relationship to our partners, to our family members, to the community of people around us, and it makes the world a better place. So I came to this work, like you said, out of necessity. I had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of panic attacks for almost 2 decades in my life that I was dealing with. I had a lot of unprocessed childhood trauma that I was dealing with and carrying around.
Yeah.
Trauma that I'd inherited from my parents, from their parents before them. And I got to this place even before my son was born, actually, where I realized that I would rather not have children than parent the way that my parents had done. And I knew that my first act of mothering really needed to be reparenting and mothering myself, so that I could show up differently to break that cycle and show up in this conscious, transformed way and offer my son better, right? Because that's what all mothers want. We all universally wish our children to get better than we received.
Absolutely.
And we have to actually model that behavior, right? We know, any of you listening that have kids, you all know that they watch us as much as they listen to us, and they observe us and mimic us. And so if we aren't demonstrating caring for ourselves and loving ourselves and,
Mm.
showing up in the world in the way that we want them to, they aren't learning those things
Mm,
then.
that's so true. We can say all we want to say, but if we're not actually doing it and embodying that, it doesn't really matter. Kids are pretty smart and they understand and they know what's real and what's authentic and what isn't. And I love that you had the awareness before you even had children to be able to do this work. That's one thing that, I have 3 kids, and it's one thing that I often say that if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have done this work before having children. It was really, I knew that, before even having kids, I didn't even know if I wanted kids, kind of the same thing. And then, I did and all that. But how did you have that self-awareness, I guess, because I think that there's a lot of people out there, a lot of women that, feel anxious, right? They're struggling with anxiety, possibly depression, just, that feeling of maybe, the harsh inner critic, all of these things. But a lot of women I see, they go towards distraction, whether that's like pharmaceuticals or whether that's alcohol, right? Like we live in this mom wine culture, right? That's like, and I was in that too. So I'm saying that not out of judgment. I'm saying that from experience. I went through that as well too. But I'm just curious, what do you think was different about you that you were like, whoa, you got this? Was there something or somebody or something that happened in your life that made you say, this has got to change before I even have children? Like, what was that for you?
Yeah, it wasn't directly connected with the idea of having kids, but it had to do with my relationship to myself. And I really had a light bulb moment. So I sort of described this as my awakening to love moment,
Yeah.
which, if I had heard that term before this happened to me, I would have rolled my eyes and thought that that sounded really ridiculous and cheesy. And then it happened to me, and I stand corrected
Sure.
because it was absolutely real. I realized in a moment, like a light bulb going off, that my subconscious internalized self-hatred was fueling my autoimmune symptoms.
Gotcha.
And so for me, that was this huge pivot moment in my life where I realized that that self-hatred was doing so much destruction and causing so much havoc in my life and also literally within my body. And that self-awareness that I needed to bring these thoughts into conscious light
Mm.
allowed me to allowed me to shift that narrative and to start changing that story. And in that self-awareness, it set me off on this path of really realizing how much unhealed trauma I had in other parts of my life. And when I was able to do that, I started to, once I became aware of it, then I was able to start doing something about it, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it really came in the form of this epiphany moment. And then that became, as I started realizing that a lot of it was trauma from my childhood growing up in an emotionally abusive household, the parenting style that my parents had used on me, which, they would not have described as a parenting style, but what they ended up offering me as a baby and a child really did cause damage. And once I was able to start realizing where some of that stemmed from, that's when I sort of put it together that I needed to change that if I did want to become a mother.
Wow, that's
And I just
powerful.
had this, yeah, I just had this feeling, like I say, deep in my bones that I was sort of called upon to do this work.
Yeah. No, I think I understand what you mean. Like there's those moments too that I've had in my life where I can't really explain it. It's just a shift. Something happened. It was like a download, a ping, just a quick drop of awareness that it was like, whoa, what's going on here? I need to do something. So yeah, no, it's like God moments, spirit moments, universe moments, whatever we want to call it. It's just definitely divine intervention, so that we can really respond to that in a way of showing up, for yourself in a different way and showing up for ourselves in a different way. I love that. So when you are helping, other moms get to this point, right, of like turning their self-hatred and or the inner critic, whatever that is, right? It's probably different levels for everybody, right? Of what that looks like and what that sounds like and feels like. What do you feel is that first step? What when I do that, I think about just so much self-compassion, and I know that you that's one of the pillars that you really work with. Is that the first thing that you help women with, is that compassion? And what happens if they are having a really hard time, right? Like I know I've worked with women too, that there's so much resistance to that self-compassion. So how do you work with that? And what's the first thing that you do with other moms?
So for me, the real big gateway to this stuff is what I call nervous system literacy.
Yeah.
And so when I say this stuff, I'm talking about my idea of dynamic self-care, which we can get more into. But
Yeah.
for me, it's made up of 3 pillars, which are self-awareness, self-compassion, and self-love. And so the idea of nervous system literacy is starting to understand the way that your nervous system is innately wired to handle and respond to stress. Because for me, and in my experience, both with myself and also with the clients that I work with, most of that inner critic and that shame and embarrassment and self-berating behavior that we take on is often associated with a way that we behave in a moment of stress.
Okay.
And so if we can start to understand why that happens, where it comes from, what we can do to prevent it, how our bodies are actually not betraying us in moments of stress and are actually protecting us. And when we can start to shift how we see these things, the way that our bodies are innately responding to things,
Yeah.
it allows us to reclaim our power, that there isn't anything wrong with us, that our bodies are not betraying us, that there's nothing wrong with the way that we behaved, that it's okay that we did this thing. And then in that understanding, we can offer things like compassion. We can start to radically accept who we are so that we can love ourselves fully and deeply, the way that we love our children fully and deeply, despite how they behave sometimes, right? And when we can start offering those things to ourselves through an awareness of how these things happen,
Yeah.
it starts to change that conversation. It starts to soften the inner critic. It starts to allow that language to change.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's powerful. And that is so, it's so huge, just, and I love how you said too, like our bodies are not betraying us and their messages, I was just working with someone the other night and she's 75 years old and she's like, I'm in the last part of my life and I'm ready. I've got to get through this. She's having a hard time standing in her power, but it's this inner critic, where she's like, like she tells herself, gosh, you got to get this right. This and so much pressure on herself, and, we uncovered a few different beliefs that were running, but I told her similar of what you're saying. I'm like, you know what? This belief served you for so long. So accept that it was there to try to be a friend for you. So the more you're shaming it, the more it's, just trying to hide out, but then it's coming out, again, like, because it's thinking that it needs to protect you. Like it's there because it's trying to do you a service. It's trying to provide a service to you. So what would happen if you shut up for this belief and just had a conversation with it and just said, you know what, thank you so much for being here for me. Thank you so much for helping protect me in my life, but I don't need you anymore. And you're free to leave. And, don't force it to leave because it's going to be resistant. Anytime we try to force anything, right, there's resistance. And so it's befriending that and then offering it, like, you can leave now. If are you ready to leave? Like, have a conversation, write a letter. And it sounds so goofy, but it's so powerful.
Exactly. And gratitude is a huge part of my practice and what I work on with women as well, because it is so powerful. And what I love in particular about gratitude is that on a neuroscience level, it actually has been shown that when you practice gratitude regularly, it shifts the state of your nervous system to one where you're more relaxed, you're more calm, you're less stressed out. So, this whole idea of like gratitude journaling, I think for some people, it's like, well, what's the point of that? And it actually works on these deep levels to start changing the way that your outlook of the world is.
Yeah.
And to your point too about, this thing served a purpose. And if you continue to fight against it, it's going to keep showing up. That was my experience with this autoimmune, I have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition. And I was telling my body that I was the enemy. Right? These thoughts, those inner critic and that dialogue that we sit with, we're literally bathing our body in those messages, and our body listen. It's sort of like our kids, right? Like it's getting the message that we send it. And if the message is, I hate you, you're worthless, why did you do that? Then our body, this is the thing, then our body actually responds to those thoughts as though that's the enemy. And it puts us into a state of defense where we're triggered into activation of fight or flight or freeze, which then perpetuate, it becomes this perpetuating cycle.
Yeah.
And when we can stop that through an awareness and practicing self-awareness skills, that alone goes so far in shifting this all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And when we think about it too, like it's a powerful story that you have and just the autoimmune and where it's a disease. It's like the body is like fighting against itself and it makes, perfect sense. And when you think about our bodies are what 70-80% water, and have you done that rice experiment? You know what I'm talking about? That you make rice and you have it in 3 jars. My kids and I have done it a couple different times over the years. And like one of the jars, you put love on it and you speak, I love you. I'm so grateful for you. And then another jar, it's the hate one. And you're like, I hate you, all these words that are just, bring up that, speak that energy of hate. And then the other one is just neglect. You just ignore it. And so then after about 30 days, and you do this every day, and then you just let it sit. And then you see the condition of the rice. And it's amazing. The ones that have the love, it's a little funky, it's been sitting there for 30 days, but it's not too bad. It may be a little yellowish color or something like that. The one that's hate, it's got black spots. It's like, kind of getting moldy. The one that's the worst, though, is actually the neglect, though, like because there's nothing there at all. But those are the 2 worst. And the only thing you're doing is just the speaking of these, because it's our words, there's powerful, there's spells and there's energy that comes from our words. And it makes such a huge difference. In water, it absorbs everything, so our cells are, like you said, bathing in our words, bathing in the energy that we are of our thoughts, of our environments even too. And so I think about too, so say, how do you do this? Like when you're working with a mom, right? And they're realizing, okay, I need to change some things. I need to shift the way I show up for myself, really bringing in more compassion and love for myself. And, what I find anyway, and I would like to hear what your thoughts are on this, their support system, if their, say, spouse or family or, whatnot it's just maybe is just as toxic as what their thoughts were going on. How do you advise, or how do you work with someone in that process of that? How can we shift when we're in an environment? I get that a lot. Like, how do I shift when my husband or my partner or my family is not supportive of this shift?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And I'll say that's probably like the hardest situation to be in doing this work.
Yeah.
Because I think depending on the severity, there's only so far that you can get in your own healing.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just be completely
The hard truth.
honest.
It is.
Yeah, you can ask my ex-husband that.
Yeah.
Because there really was, like, I got to a point where I was like, this isn't changing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, go out and divorce your husband. That's not what I'm saying. But the point is, you really have to start with looking at the environment that you're in and starting to notice just how toxic it truly is. And then, depending on the issue and, the severity of it and the relationship with the person, if it's somebody that is maybe somebody you have to put a boundary up with for a little while. And even if that's family, even if that's close family, and really let these people take a time out of your life. And that's okay. And we're not told that enough. And it doesn't mean that it has to be forever. It can be if that's the right choice. Sometimes that's the right choice, is you have to cut somebody out.
Yeah.
And that's not easy. And it's not a fun decision to have to make. I've been there.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that sometimes when you put those boundaries up and you step away from a situation to allow yourself to do that healing work,
Yeah.
the relationship can then be altered by you doing the work, even without the other person doing a thing.
Yeah.
So that was actually my situation with my father. So I wrote him out of my life for what I thought was forever. I had given him chances over and over and over again. And he drew the last straw with me. I was done.
Yeah.
I didn't have any meaningful interaction with him for close to a decade.
Wow.
And then my son was born. And I really, really, really struggled with what to do about that.
Yeah.
And I was able to start to let him slowly back in.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's one of the most cherished people in my son's life.
Oh, wow.
And what shifted was not my father. He is still the same person. You know, he's changed in aging. You know, the process of aging I think changes
Sure.
everyone.
Yeah.
But the significant change was in me.
Okay.
And I'm not being triggered by his behavior in the same way.
Yeah.
I am not owning his behavior in the same way. I'm able to see our separateness and I'm able to take of him the good parts and then leave the behavior that I don't love or appreciate and I can leave that and set it aside. And I'm not because I'm showing up to the relationship as a different person who's
Yeah.
done healing work.
Yeah.
It's affected how I'm able to see him. Now, this is like a best case scenario. And I'll just say for those people listening who are like, no way, that's not happening, that's okay too. It's
Yeah.
okay if you have to cut people out forever. But you know, if you're in those situations, I think the first place to start is really doing a good assessment of who's bothering you, the things that are triggering you, figuring out what your non-negotiables are.
Yeah.
So what things you can put up with and then what things you just don't like and you just for whatever reason and it's okay to just have the reason be I don't like this thing.
Yep.
This triggers me. This bothers me and you can leave it right there.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that we're not told enough is that we're allowed to have likes and dislikes and preferences
Yeah.
and that there's no reason to justify those
Yeah. We don't have
other
to
than
rationalize them. Yeah.
yeah, other than they are what they are. And that's okay. That's part of radical acceptance of yourself, right?
Yeah.
Knowing those things about yourself. And I think that even in a toxic relationship, there's room for that sort of self exploration to then decide how you want to continue to navigate in that relationship or not.
Yeah. No, I love that. What I hear in that too is, especially with your dad, right? Like the more you did the work and as far as to accept yourself, the more you could accept parts of him that maybe weren't like so toxic, but yet they were like just him. And then able to, maybe set boundaries in other ways, but not get so triggered by every little thing, right? Yeah. And that's huge because the more we do accept ourselves, the more we can accept other people too and allow them to be who they are. And how I do it too, I'm like, this is how I've grown, I guess, in my own relationships as well, is I know what I want, I know what I don't want, I know what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And as long as I communicate those things clearly to people, then I give them the choice. Then they can show up in whatever way they want to. And if it doesn't align, it doesn't align. And if it does, it does. It's great, but I'm not trying to force somebody to be who they're not. And I'm not disappointed if they don't show up in the way that I want them or expect them to, but I give them an option. It's like this is what would feel really good, for me right now. This is what I need right now. And then they get the option. They get the choice to show up because they're a free human being too in this relationship. And then we can make our decision of like, does this work or maybe this doesn't work, and for me, and it's not always that easy, right? Because there's like emotional, like attachments and things like that to it. But it's a good way though, I feel like for myself to stay in my own grounding, to stay in my own sovereignty, to stay within my own space and know what's okay for me and really getting back to my own values. That's really what I hear, like what are my own values? And like you're saying, what are the non-negotiables and what are the values that reflect who I am? So then I know how to make my boundaries rather than boundaries being mostly out of fear. That's why I see a lot of
Mm.
especially women, right? We're making boundaries out of fear of like, I don't like that, so you need to stay away. Versus like, okay, how can we like rephrase this and be like, okay, well, whatever our fears are, it really reveals possibly, I mean, there's some shadow stuff there too, potentially, but there could be a value in there too. Like what's underneath there. So that means that if you don't like, if something makes you uncomfortable that somebody said that might seem disrespectful or sexist or something like that, right? You might be like, I really honor then like open and honest and conscious communication. Okay, that's a value of yours then, right? So then we can use all of our situations that happen in our life and then create and then understand who we are more too, versus like, oh, that doesn't feel good, but then not even understand why, and then just push somebody out of our life rather than going, oh, this is important to me, and then having like an empowered conversation with that person about that, and then see how they want to show up in that. Hey, this is Erin Esser. I wanted to ask you this question. Imagine what your life could be like if you knew your purpose. I work with astrology and human design as tools of activating your life. I'm able to pinpoint specifically where in your life are your challenges and limitations, and then also be able to pinpoint where your dharma is, where your freedom is, where your liberation is, what your purpose is in this lifetime. For more information on my karma to dharma readings that dramatically shift people's lives, head to my website, erinesser.com, or you'll find the link below.
I love that. And I think that, it takes practice. And I think that and that's how you get better at doing these things.
Yeah.
Because I think so many of us as women and as mothers are not practiced at that because we're not encouraged to do that, right? Again, like I said in the beginning, a good mother is a good martyr.
Yes.
And I think that so many of us have become disconnected. This is, a theme that I see in the women that I work with is that we become mothers and then we lose our own sense of identity.
Yeah.
And that's assuming that we were closely connected to our sense of identity heading into motherhood in the first place.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And for those of us who have experienced trauma in our lives, and let's be real, that's most of us, whether we acknowledge that or not, and whether we've resolved that or not. But trauma also disconnects us from our identity and from knowing what we want and what we like, and so when we can start to realize these things, then the work starts with who am I? What do I like? How do I like to be treated? How do I like to have people in my life show up for me? How do I not want them to, all these different things, and really take a, hard look at that and then practice owning that and allowing that to be okay.
Even if that means somebody might walk out of your life.
Right.
It's okay.
Exactly.
It's okay. It's not a reflection of who you are. It's just that it's just not aligned. I work a lot with human design. I'm not sure if you're familiar with human design, but I work with human design and astrology as well. And it's like, I find that there's such good tools to like a new mirror for people, to say, okay, you've been conditioned, to feel this way or to shame yourself in this way. Well, here's actually who you are. And now you can start to accept yourself in this way. And then, going in and healing those places that have been fragmented, but yeah, like I left my marriage about almost 4 years ago, and, and we're still, pretty good friends and stuff, but what you said about your ex, it resonated with me as well too, because, I was just on this growth journey and I knew I was like, there's only so far I can go if I don't make this choice. And it was a very hard choice. But what happened though, is with my kids, it turned out from this belief around my kids need stability. They need to be with, their mom and their dad and all these things to, oh my gosh, there was one day, it was just this moment of, what am I showing my kids? Mm-hmm. What am I teaching my kids by just being in this relationship? And by complaining about it, and I know I'm not to them, but I know that they knew I wasn't happy. Kids are smart, they tune into things really quickly. So like, what am I teaching them by just being in this relationship? I'm teaching them that, that this is a normal relationship, that this is okay, that they can settle for less. Well, mom settles for less, so I guess I'm going to too, even though I tell them, every day, don't settle for less. Well, they're going to see me settling for less in a relationship. Well, where else then am I settling for less then? If I'm doing this in a relationship, right? How we do one thing is how we do, it's how we show up in all things. So it was powerful. And that was a huge light bulb moment for me as well too. And it was like, I can't do this to my kids. It went from I have to stay in this relationship for my kids to, wow, I can't stay in this relationship because of, it was me too, but it was like really because of my kids too. I don't want to show them that this is like a normal, healthy relationship.
Yeah, I love that. That's so spot on because you're showing them that it's okay to settle for less. You're showing them that this model of relationship is appropriate, that it's okay for you to let yourself be treated in the ways that you were, all of these things. And that's what, that's sort of where this idea of being a radical mother comes from, is this idea of being aware of these things and then shifting them for your sake and the sake of your children. Yeah. Through things like self-awareness It's funny you bring up human design and astrology, because those two, I've dabbled in both of those. I'm not very proficient in either, but for me, it's been Enneagram.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Which is another, and that's one of the tools that I use with clients as a gateway to really understanding yourself better, right? And these are all, and that's just it. They're all tools
They're all
for
tools.
for
Absolutely.
self-reflection and
Yes.
learning things about yourself and ways to connect. Another one that I love is Gretchen Rubin's Four Tendencies. Have you heard of
Oh,
this?
I have not. No.
This one's really interesting because it gives you insight into how you respond to obligations, both internal and external.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, it's especially this time of year when people are, at the point where they're breaking their New Year's resolutions when we're recording this today.
Yeah.
But, but looking at that at all the times, it gives you insight on ways that you show up in the world that I've found to be really useful because, all of these things, the more I learn about myself,
Yeah.
the more I'm able to just accept those parts of me instead of feeling like there's something wrong with me
Yeah.
for being a certain way,
Oh,
rather than embracing it and celebrating it and using it to my advantage.
yes.
I, in the past, have felt shame or embarrassment or felt bad about some of the ways that I just am. And these things are probably not going to change. I will always be a questioner. From the time I was in second grade and the teacher said, "Stop raising your hand,"
Yeah.
to the day I die, like I question things. And now I just accept that. I love that about myself. It
Yeah.
makes it easier for me to move through life when I go, I question stuff.
Yeah.
Watch out. I'm
Absolutely.
going to ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
And I don't feel bad about it. But before I was able to really accept that,
Mhm.
I sort of internalized, that teacher saying there's something wrong with you that you want to keep
Yeah.
asking why,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so yeah, I love these tools for self-reflection because they give us permission to be ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There, I absolutely, like, hands down, I love that. And it just shows us too, it gives us a highlight of where we've been conditioned in our lives to feel less than,
Mhm.
versus, like you said, accepting these parts of ourselves that maybe we shamed at some point in our life because other people shamed us, when we were little. And, Bruce Lipton talks about this, like the first 7 years of our life. And I know I think it can be older. I've heard, up to even 12 years, but our childhood, right? We're sponges. And so our environment, how we are as adults is literally like, it's a manifestation of the program. I mean, we live in a program, like, and it's the programs that, were embedded. It's like, so I tell people, like, we have to press Control Alt Delete, like, on our programs, and then reinsert a new program. Like, just be conscious of the program that we're downloading within us, because everything's a program. But, like,
Yes.
is it a program that you want to live out? Is it a program that you want to run? Or are you being, run by the program, or are you running the program, and to bring in some consciousness and awareness around that, So you mentioned nervous system literacy. I would love to have you talk a little bit about that, and a couple things specifically, like what are some like ways that aren't too common, right? Anxiety, stress, things like that, when we're like, that's, very much like we all can pretty much notice when we're in that state for the most part. But what are maybe some subtle clues that our nervous system is maybe dysregulated, that maybe some people don't know about, or maybe they wouldn't recognize unless they heard, like, oh, I didn't realize that would be something. And what are maybe some tips or some, like, maybe an exercise or a tool that somebody could, start to utilize to start to regulate their nervous system?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just will say, I don't know that everyone notices their anxiety. It's funny,
Mm.
only because I've had this conversation a couple of times recently with a couple of mamas who've gone, wait a minute, I think I've actually been really anxious for a long time and I didn't recognize that.
It was just their
So
normal programming, huh?
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think, so for me, I can say one of my anxiety symptoms that I didn't know was anxiety for a long time was this feeling in my stomach. And I thought for a long time, and honestly, it's sort of for me, again, because I have celiac disease, I had a lot of stomach issues for a really long time. And it would sort of go back and forth between me, knowing if this was from anxiety or if this was from something that I ate, or not knowing what the difference was. But I dealt with chronic stomach pain for a really long time.
Wow.
And I can tell you that cleaning up my diet after the celiac diagnosis didn't touch that pain. It had nothing to do
Yeah.
with the celiac. It was my anxiety. So sometimes it can be physical things like that that can point to dysregulation in our nervous system.
Digestive issues, right? Are a big
Digestive issues in
thing.
general can
Yeah.
often be dysregulation in our nervous system.
Yeah.
It can also be things like, being compulsive about things,
Mm.
feeling a need to really want to be in control and
Mm.
sort of having a hyper arousal control.
Maybe
I'm
like a
not
hypervigilance kind of like,
Thank you. That's the word
yeah.
that I was just
Okay.
stumbling to find. Yes,
Yeah.
and vigilance. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, vigilance. And then, because the other thing I was going to say about that too is being really jumpy and easily startled. So this is another
Yes.
one that people don't necessarily think about. I know
Yeah.
it's funny. My sister used to pick on me because I could scare myself in the mirror. Like that's how just super jumpy I was all the time because my nervous system was so dysregulated. And I never would have thought that that was, my
Yeah.
body trying to tell me anything. I thought that's just how I was.
Wow.
So some of these things are pointing towards some dysregulation in your system.
Yeah.
And things that you can do are gratitude, like we talked about earlier. So, gratitude practices really help shift that.
Yeah.
Breathing exercises where your breath, your exhale is longer than your inhale will help. Physical activity, movement of any kind can help. That's why we feel better after we exercise.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say, someone who does not love to exercise or go running or any of that kind of stuff, it doesn't have to be in that form. It can be something like yoga. It can be something like stretching. It can be something like turning on some really loud dance music and running around the kitchen
Mm.
with your kids having a dance party.
Sure.
That movement and social connection are going to help start to shift these things as well. And so these are all tools that we can use. TRE, you mentioned in the beginning, I'm a certified TRE provider. This is another thing that you can do. You can shake. Your body has an innate shaking mechanism that can help to discharge stress. So you
Like
can
a
do
dog.
practices. Yeah, exactly like a dog. Yep. All mammals can do this. We are mammals. And so our nervous system has that capacity, the same as our dogs shaking when there's
Yeah.
loud noises or fireworks or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different things that you can do that can take the edge off in the moment and then also to help to improve and increase your resiliency to stress over time. So
Okay.
I'm always telling clients, I can't take stress away. Stress is inevitable for all of us. I can't take it out of my own life. I can't take it out of your
Yeah.
life. What we
Yeah.
can do is change how we respond to it
Okay.
and increase our capacity for handling stress before it overwhelms us. Because really, it's when we start to get overwhelmed that we're moved into this place of dysregulation. And then, if that's chronic enough, we can kind of become stuck in that state of dysregulation, in a
Mm.
state of something like chronic anxiety or even depression, or oscillating back and forth between those two, which is another common
For
symptom of dysregulation.
No, I hear you. I remember noticing too in my life, just this level of overwhelm at times that I would feel, and I would allow myself to get to this. And when I started to understand like my human design, there's 9 centers in human design, and my head and my ajna, my mind and my head are completely open. And so like knowing this now, like has helped me go, oh, am I thinking about things that don't matter? It's easy, so easy to get overwhelmed. And so it's helped me to like, when I feel that, it's like, okay, Erin, no, you don't need to do everything. It's okay. It's just that self-talk. It was like, it's okay. You're good. Just do one thing here. But then there's some
Mhm.
days where I'm like, you know what? I just need to take a break. I need to go out for a walk. I need to just literally disengage from what I'm doing, get some sunshine, get some fresh air. And like you said, like move. There's times I just like will shake out my arms and just like move my body. And it feels so good. It's almost like it's like resetting myself.
It
And
is resetting yourself.
yeah, it's amazing. It's such a simple but powerful tool that I think that when we have more self-awareness, it's like and we come back to ourselves, the more, at least this has been my experience, the more we just almost innately move to these things, where it's like, oh, because we're more in touch with our body, like, and we're more in touch with like which just is almost a natural response versus maybe other distraction type of methods that we would normally go into before. You mentioned something too just a bit ago about social connection, and I'm curious, just with this last year of almost a year now of just everything happening in our country. So or in the world, really. So we need social connection, don't we? And people, so I'm curious, people who maybe don't have the self-awareness and have already had like some issues with nervous system, probably getting a whole lot worse, I'm assuming, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Obviously, this is what I do. This is what I have a lot of experience in. This is what I've been trained in. And this last year has kicked my butt pretty hard. It's been really brutal because we are social creatures. And Zoom is wonderful. And Zoom has, saved the sanity of mothers everywhere, but it's not enough. And it really, I have a lot of thoughts about this in terms of just the way that this has all been handled, because mental health has not been factored in to the response. And I think that that's a shame, because I think that does as much destruction as anything.
I think
And
it's
we
said
really
more,
do
to tell you the
need
truth.
social interaction.
Yeah.
I have a 2-year-old who, when he sees other kids, he's like, oh, they're tiny, like he's just drawn to them. And I'm like, you can't go over there. And it's like, it breaks my heart when I have to try to because he doesn't know what he just knows that he wants to be connected to other people. And we are no different, right? We just have to have better self-control than toddlers, but it's not good for us. I'll say that.
It is not good for us. And I think it's so natural. I remember being at the store. It was shortly after all this happened. And I can't remember what store I was at, but I noticed though in the aisle, one of the workers of the store was stocking some shelves, and one of a person was looking for something, and I didn't hear the conversation, but I was just watching the body language. And the guy walks over to the worker guy, and he literally just puts his hand, like on his, on his like shoulder, to be like, hey, it's just this natural connection, like, hey, like, and then, it was just this like startling, of this worker there, and the guy meant no, it was just this natural thing. And I just thought, gosh, how sad is this, that like now we're fearing this normal, instinctual, innate, it's an instinct to connect. And now we're like, oh, we don't know what to do with this. And it's this fear, like you're saying, this startled, like it's just, it's just amazing. And yeah, so I just definitely, I feel this work, especially after this year, is so important. It's so critical. It's so critical. And that we really can take the time to just tune in and to ourselves and to our bodies, and do whatever it takes to to help ourselves within this process, and to reach out when, if we're not feeling
Yeah.
so hot.
So I can give you an example of how I put this stuff into practice, right?
Yeah.
Because it actually relates really well to the pandemic and masks, the issue of masks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed pretty early on, when I had to start going out to the grocery store with a mask on, and everybody's got masks on and I can't see people's faces.
Yeah.
I was like, what is going on? My anxiety is through the roof. And I knew it wasn't just from the normal anxiety in the beginning of like, we don't know how this spreads. I don't know how safe it is to be out at all. There was a normal level of anxiety, but I knew myself well enough that I was like, this is really unchecked. Like, what's happening? And it continued every time I went to the store. And I was feeling entirely claustrophobic by the mask. I really did, it was super uncomfortable for me to have it on. I just could not wait to get out of the store. And I was noticing people being afraid of me and pulling back. And it was so uncomfortable. But I realized that in not being able to see people's faces, one of the ways that your nervous system works is that it's constantly evaluating your circumstances and your environment for safety and also for danger, right? It's looking in the absence of safety, it assumes that there's danger. So, and that's one of the things, like the basic foundations of how it works. And one of the ways that it assesses safety in other humans is through facial expression. And when you have this much of a person's face covered, you can't see their facial cues. And so in the absence of safety being determined through their face, your brain on its own, subconsciously, in matters of nanoseconds, interprets that as danger inherently. So, and because of my trauma history, I'm more prone to that anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then having people also withdraw from me, I was like, oh, this is what's happening. And I put that together. I had this sort of aha moment that I was like,
Yeah.
this is why I feel so claustrophobic. This is why I can't stand going into the store right now. And once I sort of put that together, I was able to use my thinking brain, so upper level executive functioning, to tell my survival brain, I know this doesn't feel comfortable. I know this feels weird. It's okay, and was able to have this sort of conversation with myself on an internal level to calm myself down. So now I don't like going out to the grocery store. I don't like wearing a mask, but I can do it now without feeling like I'm about to have a panic attack.
Yeah.
And all that shifted was my awareness of this is why it feels unsafe. So, and I'm not getting safety externally, but what I can do is provide safety for myself internally.
I love that.
And that's what allowed that change to happen, that I can now be out in public for a
Well, and
short period of time.
yeah, yeah, no, I hear you. And I think you brought up something really important. It's, the external safety versus internal safety. And really, the only thing that we can really truly control anywhere in any time, whether we're going through a, whatever this is or anything else, right, is our own internal safety and how we choose to show up for ourselves, even internally, right? And so what I hear from what you did for yourself was, this higher brain functioning, you're able to talk and almost reparent the lower brain, fear-based brain of like, you're okay. It's okay, Krista, you're fine. Nothing is, you don't have to anything to fear. This is why this is happening, right? Because I feel like our mind is trying to make sense of everything, right? And so we'll come up with a story if we don't, and same with our children, right? It'll come up with a story, whether it's true or not, just to make sense of something, because there's an element of safety, of the idea of knowing, of understanding. And so what I hear you doing in there is just literally reprogramming this primal brain, the reptilian brain, primal brain, whatever we want to call it, right? That's this fight or flight mechanism to go, you're okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, as moms, it's what we would do with our children too, right? If they were
Exactly.
melting down or having, really upset, we'd be like, it's okay. Like, you're okay. I've got you. I've got you.
You're safe.
You're safe. You're safe. And we would provide space for that. Like, it's okay. You're
Yeah.
okay. You're
Yep.
okay.
It's
I
about
know you don't,
validating.
yes. Like, I know you
Yeah.
don't feel safe right now, but I've got you. I've got your
Mm-hmm.
back. You're okay. You're okay.
Right.
So I love that. And I feel that's a really actually good place to like kind of to end, just in that moment of, that's really the ultimate reparenting of ourselves, even through this process, because I feel like we're all searching for safety on some level, which is why we have all these beliefs, and anxiety and all these things. Like, they're all there to somehow bring us some level of of safety, but it's dysfunctional, and like we get to a point in our lives, it just doesn't work anymore. And so what you just spoke of really was a beautiful example of doing that for oneself, and really relying on like, okay, I can't rely on external safety right now, but I can rely on myself. I've got my back. And now how can I do this for myself? And then we can turn around and do that then for our children.
Yes,
So
exactly.
that's awesome. So I love this conversation with you, Krista. It was really, really amazing. And I just really enjoyed it, and time just like flew by. And so I'm so happy that you were able to be on here. And I would love to be able to have you share, if there's like, if people wanted to work with you or wanted to hear more about what you're doing or what you're up to kind of right now, where can people read more about what you do? And if you have any programs or how they can work with you.
Sure. So I do dynamic self-care coaching
Yeah.
for radical mothers, and you can find information about that on my website, which is christabevan.com. And then I also have a couple other places where you can connect with me if this idea of being a radical mother is something that you're listening to, going, yes, that's me. I have a Facebook group that I facilitate called the Radical Mother Village. And then I actually have a podcast that has that same name, where I'm talking about all of these kinds of topics about reparenting ourselves and tools for dealing with this stuff. So you can find that. It's called the Radical Mother Village.
Awesome. And we'll have those links too below, like whether you're on watching the video on YouTube or on the podcast as well too. We'll have all the contact information for Krista. And I love your mission. And there just needs to be more awareness and more, just people really doing this, especially during this time in 2021. It's so important to stand in our own, in ourselves, and being grounded in who we are, and passing that to our children, especially when they're 2, 4, 7, 10, 11, 15, being almost, if we're thinking about programming right at those ages, that people are scary, that stay away. Like, there's going to be a lot this next generation, we're going to have a lot of work, to do with allowing that safety within themselves as well too. So this work is so important, and it's so pivotal. And I just thank you for what you're doing, and for showing up and doing the healing process yourself so that you can share it with other people. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. So thanks for joining today on the show. And if you enjoyed what you watched today, make sure that you hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube for more information and amazing interviews like this. And make sure you check out Krista as well too at the links below. Until next time. Thank you for joining me on today's show. To learn more about Activate Your Life podcast and my YouTube channel, just go to erinesser.com. Download the free gift at erinesser.com/healthy-boundaries. That is all for now. We'll see you next week.